The sky over Seoul was a perfect, clear blue. It was a peaceful afternoon. Inside a nondescript building, buried deep under layers of reinforced concrete, Jinwoo Park stared at a screen. It wasn't a normal screen. It was linked to the Galactic Network, a system forced upon Earth decades ago. The images were meant to be a warning. Today, they were something else. The Galactic Empire was showing a live broadcast. They were showing the end of the Valkyrie people. The Valkyrie were peaceful. They were artists and thinkers. They had refused to give half their population to the Empire as slaves. So the Empire decided to make an example of them. The view was from a high orbit. It showed the green and blue world of the Valkyrie. Then silver ships descended. Beams of light touched the surface. Cities did not explode. They simply vanished, turned to dust and ash. There was no sound from the planet, but the numbers on the screen told the story. Population, 10 billion. The number went down. It went down very fast. On the surface of Earth, in every city, in every home, the broadcast played. People watched from their living rooms. They watched on public screens in squares. A silent horror fell over the world. In the bunker, Jinwoo did not feel the horror. Not yet. His mind, trained by years of competitive gaming and tactical analysis, did something else. It started to work. He saw the pattern of the Imperial ships. They moved in a standard fan formation. They fired in rotating sequences. Each city was targeted for exactly 4.2 seconds. It was efficient. It was cold. It was, Jinwoo realized, deeply predictable. He began to type on a separate keyboard, recording the data. The timing, the energy signatures, the slight lag between the lead ship's command and the wing ship's response. He did not see genocide. He saw code. He saw a pattern to break. High above Earth, on the lunar orbital platform, Commander Sujin Kim watched the same broadcast on the bridge of her ship, a small patrol vessel called the Watchful. Her crew was silent. Some had tears on their faces. Sujin's hands were clenched so tightly, her knuckles were white. The Valkyrie were not strangers. There had been whispers of trade, of cultural exchange. Now there was only this gray dust where their cities had been. The Emperor's face filled the screen. He was old, with cold eyes like chips of stone. He spoke about order. He spoke about the necessity of calibration. He said the universe required efficiency. When the last Valkyrie number blinked to 0, he looked straight into the camera. "This is the cost of disorder," Emperor Creel said, his voice smooth and calm. "Your planet, Earth, has been assessed. You are behind on your mineral quotas. Your population shows signs of non-compliance. You will triple your next shipment of resources. You will send 50,000 workers to the core systems. This is not a request. It is a calibration. Comply or be calibrated." The screen went dark. The silence on the bridge was heavy. Sujin unclenched her hands. She took a slow breath. The despair inside her was a vast, cold ocean. But at the bottom of that ocean, something hard began to form. A resolve. A rock. They had just murdered 10 billion beings to send a message. And they thought Earth would simply obey. She looked at her crew, saw their fear, their anger. "Signal command," she said, her voice not much more than a whisper, but it carried across the quiet bridge. Tell them the Watchful is standing by. We are ready for their orders." She was not ready to die, but she was ready to make the Empire regret this day. In a laboratory in Daejeon, Minho Lee turned off the screen. He felt sick. He was an engineer. He worked with materials, with forces, with math. The scale of the cruelty was beyond his understanding. For years, his research had been a joke. Gravity folds, photon binding. The military officials who funded him did so with small budgets, calling it blue sky thinking. A fun idea. Now, he looked at the equations on his wall. They were not fun ideas. They were possibilities. The Empire's power was based on plasma and brute force. What if Earth fought with something else? Something they did not understand? He walked to a whiteboard and erased a complex formula. He started again. This time, his lines were bolder. He was not designing a better ship. He was designing a new rulebook. Across the planet, the shock began to turn. In homes and streets, the fear did not become panic. It became a quiet, burning anger. Una Choi saw it on the faces of the people in her neighborhood. She was a community leader, someone who organized aid and events. Now, she stood on a small bench, people gathering around her. They looked to her, their eyes lost. "They think we are weak," Una said, her voice clear and strong despite the tremor in her heart. "They think we will break because we are not one people, because we argue, because we are messy." She looked at their faces. "But they do not know what we are. Our anger is not loud. It is deep. It is in our bones. We will remember the Alchemy, and we will show the galaxy that some messages cannot be sent without a reply." In a training ground outside Bison, Sergeant Hyen Kim watched the broadcast with his unit. The young soldiers were restless, furious. They wanted to fight now. They wanted to hit something. Hyen, a veteran with gray in his hair, stood still. He had seen conflict. He knew what real fighting looked like. It was not glorious. It was mud and fear and waiting. The Empire had just shown they did not fight wars. They performed executions. Hyen turned to his men. "They are coming," he said simply. "They will come here to this ground, expecting us to stand in lines and be erased. We will not." He picked up a standard-issue rifle. It was useless against Imperial armor. "We will learn to fight differently. We will use the ground. We will use the cities. We will use their arrogance. We will make them pay for every single step." Back in the Soul Bunker, Jinwoo had finished his preliminary analysis. He had a file. It showed the gaps in the Imperial formation. It showed the predictable rhythm of their attacks. It showed that for all their power, they were not creative. They were bullies following a script. He saved the file. He titled it, "Calibration Flaws." He looked at the blank screen where, just minutes before, a world had died. The horror finally reached him, a cold wave that made him shiver. But underneath the cold, a fire was lit. The Empire had made a mistake. They had shown their hand. And Jinwoo Park, a former gamer from Seoul, had just memorized every single card. The Galactic Empire expected a response from Earth. They expected pleading, panic, or immediate surrender. What they received, in the hours that followed, was nothing. Total, complete silence. Every official channel went dark. The forced network relay from Earth stopped transmitting data. To the Imperial observers watching from distant posts, it seemed as if the blue planet had simply gone quiet, like a child hiding after a loud noise. They assumed it was fear. They were wrong. It was the sound of a world taking a deep, collective breath. It was the silence before the storm. Emperor Creel, informed of the quiet, simply nodded. He believed his lesson had been learned. He did not know that on Earth, the lesson had been observed, recorded, and was now being used to write a reply. The calibration had begun, but not the one he intended. The silence from Earth stretched into days, then weeks. In the vast halls of the Galactic Imperial Command, it was seen as confirmation. The primitives were broken, hiding in their caves, waiting for the harvesters to come. Emperor Creel gave no further thought to them. His focus was on the next unruly system. The silent blue world was a problem solved. On Earth, the silence was not empty. It was the most focused, most unified sound the planet had ever made. It was the hum of 10,000 factories running day and night. It was the whisper of millions of people working in shifts. It was the quiet rustle of paper in bunkers, where old strategies were burned and new ones were drawn. Jinwoo, Park's small office in the bunker, became a nerve center. His file, Calibration Flaws, was not just a report. It was now a living document, a Bible for a new kind of war. He and his team of analysts, many of them also from gaming or coding backgrounds, watched every scrap of Imperial footage ever leaked. They studied battles against other species. They found a chilling consistency. The Empire did not adapt. They applied the same solutions: orbital bombardment, infantry waves in powered armor, terror tactics. They were a hammer, and every problem was a nail. Jinwoo's team started to build simulators. They weren't training for space battles as the Empire fought them. They were training to break the script. They always lead with their heavy cruiser, Jinwoo murmured, pointing at a screen. It's a symbol. It projects power. So we ignore it. We let it feel big. And we cut its legs out from under it. His ideas were sent up the chain. They were met with resistance from old generals who thought in terms of fleets and direct firepower. But higher up, people were listening. People who had seen the Valkyrie turn to dust. On the lunar platform, Commander Sujin Kim was no longer on the watchful. She stood in a vast construction dock, floating in zero gravity, looking at the skeleton of a new ship. It was angular, all sharp edges and flat planes, unlike the smooth, organic curves of Imperial design. It was called the Dauntless. She had been chosen to command it. The ship was being built around a new core principle: defense first. We cannot match their gun for gun, the chief engineer told her. So we must be able to take a hit they cannot imagine giving. The technology was Minho Lee's. Sujin studied the schematics for the photonic lattice shield. It didn't just absorb energy. It refracted it, bending light and plasma around the hull like water around a stone. It would require perfect coordination from her crew. One flaw in the lattice and the shield would fail. She spent her days drilling her new team, running simulations of the shield failing, over and over, until the responses were instinct. Minho Lee's laboratory was now the heart of a global project. His quiet theories were being turned into reality at a frightening speed. The gravity manipulation device was the key. It wasn't a weapon to destroy, but a tool to control the battlefield. In a test over the empty Pacific, a prototype ship created a tiny gravitational vortex. A target drone, simulating an Imperial fighter, was not torn apart. Instead, it was thrown wildly off course, its navigation systems completely confused. Minho watched the data scroll. They rely on precise formation flying, he said to his exhausted team. We will make space itself unpredictable for them. His other project, the quantum sync communication, was even more revolutionary. It allowed for instant, unjammable communication between any two human units, no matter the distance. While Imperial commanders sent light-speed signals that took minutes to travel, Earth's fleet would act as one single mind. This unity was Unichoi's battlefield. The world had come together, but old fears and tensions simmered under the surface. Her job was to keep the focus on the horizon. She traveled between the mega factories, the mining operations in the asteroids, the crowded shelters being built underground. She did not give grand speeches. She spoke to small groups. She showed them the Valkyrie broadcast again. They think this will break us, she would say, her voice steady. They think because we are many different voices, we are weak. But look at what you are building. The welder in Bizen is connecting a plate that will protect the pilot from Zhongyi. The programmer in Seoul is writing code that will guide the soldier from Mumbai. We are not one note. We are a chord. And together, we are making a sound they have never heard. In the training grounds, Sergeant Hyen Kim's unit was learning to fight a ghost war. Their new gear, based on Minho's smaller-scale discoveries, was finally arriving. The personal shield generators were bulky packs, but they could deflect a single blast from a plasma rifle. The new weapons were not energy-based. They were kinetic. Railguns that fired dense slugs at impossible speeds, designed to punch through Imperial armor at close range. Hyen drilled his soldiers in urban combat and hit-and-run tactics. You will not stand and fight them. He barked. You will appear from a tunnel. You will fire once. You will vanish into a building. You will make them afraid of every shadow, every window. Their armor makes them strong, but it also makes them slow. We will be fast. We will be annoying. And then we will be deadly. The Galactic Empire's scheduled harvest date approached. A fleet of bulky, utilitarian transport ships, escorted by a single mid-tier battlecruiser and 6 fighter carriers, made its way to the Sol system. It was the same force that collected from a dozen other worlds. It was a routine operation. The commander of the battlecruiser, a veteran named Gore, barely glanced at the tactical readout of Earth. He expected to see the orbital docks full of loaded containers, the planetary defense forces standing down. He expected silence and obedience. What his sensors saw instead made him sit up straight. The orbital docks were empty. The lunar platform was dark. And there, positioned between his fleet and the blue planet, was a small group of ships. They were unlike any he had seen. They were stark, gray, and still. They made no move to attack. They simply waited .go or felt a flicker of irritation. This was a delay. This was a show of pointless pride. He opened a channel on the forced galactic frequency. Earth vessels, you are obstructing an Imperial harvest. Power down your weapons and move aside. This is your only warning. On the bridge of the Dauntless, Sujin Kim heard the translated words. She looked at the faces of her crew. They were scared, but they were ready. She thought of the Alkari, turned to silent dust. She thought of the people on the planet below, trusting her. She nodded to her communications officer. The response was not on the galactic frequency. It was a tight, laser-focused beam directly to Gore's ship. There was no video, only a voice. It was Sujin's, calm and clear. No. Aboard the Imperial cruiser, Gore stared at his console in disbelief. Then, his irritation turned to cold anger. He had his orders. If the primitives wanted a lesson, he would give them one. He turned to his weapons officer. Target the lead ship. Destroy it. A single shot should be enough for them to remember their place. The single searing bolt of Imperial plasma lanced across the dark space. On the bridge of the Dauntless, every eye was fixed on the main screen. The energy signature was massive, designed to vaporize a ship twice their size. Sujin Kim did not flinch. Her hands were steady on the armrests of her command chair. Hold the lattice, she said, her voice low. Steady. The plasma bolt struck the shimmering, honeycomb-like energy field that surrounded the Dauntless. It did not explode in a fiery cataclysm. Instead, it splashed. It fractured into a million twisting tendrils of light that wrapped around the shield, searching for a weakness that wasn't there, before dissipating into harmless energy. The ship shuddered, a deep, groaning vibration through its frame, but the hull remained untouched. The lights on the bridge flickered once and then held steady. On the Imperial cruiser, Commander Gore leaned forward, his disbelief complete. The tactical screen showed the Earthship intact. His weapons officer stammered a confirmation. The target. It absorbed the hit, sir. Unknown shield technology. Gore's mind, trained in rigid Imperial doctrine, scrambled. This was not in the procedure. Primitives did not have shields that could stop a cruiser's main gun. His protocol dictated an overwhelming response to unexpected resistance. All batteries, fire. Focus on that ship. Fighters, launch and engage. As the Imperial fleet buzzed with activity, its formation tightening for a full barrage, Jinwu Park watched from the tactical center on Earth. The data feed from the Dauntless was live in his holodisplay. He saw the Imperial ships moving, their energy spikes as weapons charged. It was exactly as he had predicted. The cruiser was the center. The carriers would move to flanking positions, standard fan-out maneuver Delta 7. They were following the script. Now, Jinwu said into his headset, his voice calm. Initiate Riptide. On the Dauntless, Sujin heard the command in her earpiece. She saw the tactical map update. 4 small, fast human corvettes, which had been running dark behind a nearby asteroid, ignited their engines. They did not head for the Imperial cruiser. Instead, they shot towards the 6 fighter carriers. Their attack was not with missiles or beams. They fired canisters that burst open silently in the vacuum dot from the Imperial perspective. Nothing happened at first. Then, alarms blared. Gravity sensors went wild. Space itself seemed to warp around the carriers. The carefully launched Imperial fighters were caught in sudden, violent gravitational eddies. They spun out of control, crashing into each other or thrown off into the void. The carriers themselves lurched, their stabilizers screaming in protest as artificial gravity wells tugged at their hulls. Minho Lee, watching from his lab, saw the data confirm his theories. The gravity mines did not destroy. They disrupted. They turned precision into chaos. A small, tired smile touched his lips. The Empire fought with force. Humanity would fight with physics. Commander Gore stared at the chaos unfolding among his carriers. Panic began to rise in his throat. Focus fire. Ignore the small ships. Destroy the lead vessel. He roared. The Imperial cruiser unleashed its full broadside. A storm of plasma converged on the Dauntless. Sujin's shield officer called out readings as the photonic lattice strained, sections flaring red on her console. Shield integrity at 60%. The pattern is holding, but the sustained fire is overloading the emitters. Evasive pattern Jinwu 3, Sujin ordered. The Dauntless, unlike the bulky Imperial cruiser, moved with surprising agility. It spun and dove, not away from the fire, but at an angle through it, forcing the Imperial guns to track and reacquire. Each movement was fed to Jinwu's simulators on Earth, which predicted the Imperial targeting solutions half a second before they were locked. Target their primary engine nacelles. Jinwu's voice came through, cool and analytical. They are lightly armored. They are a structural vanity. They expect no one to get close enough to hit them. The Dauntless weathered another glancing hit, the deck lurching. Railguns, lock on coordinates provided, Sujin commanded. Along the flanks of the human ship, magnetic coils charged with a low hum. They fired not energy, but solid tungsten rods. The projectiles were invisible in the blackness until they struck. On the Imperial cruiser, the impacts were not explosions. They were deep, shuddering crunches. The elegant, sweeping engine nacelles were punctured, then ripped apart from within as containment fields failed. Secondary explosions tore through the stern of the great ship. Power across the vessel flickered and died. It was now a drifting, dead weight. Gore was thrown from his command chair. He clawed his way back, looking at the ruins of his bridge. His ship was dead. His fighters were gone. His carriers were spinning helplessly. On his main screen, the angular gray Earth ship hovered, its weapons still trained on him. It was not moving in for the kill. It was just watching, On Earth, in the public squares where people had gathered around screens, a silence had fallen. They had watched the Imperial bolt strike their ship and hold. They had watched the chaos unfold. They had seen the impossible. They were winning, not through strength, but through cleverness, through a plan. Yuna Choi stood among a crowd in Seoul, her hand over her mouth. She felt no joy, only a fierce, trembling pride. They were not victims. Not today, Sergeant Hyen Kim and his unit watched from their barracks. They saw the Imperial power crippled. Hyen nodded slowly. "Good," he grunted to his men. "That is how you do it. You don't meet their strength. You cut their tendons." Aboard the Dauntless, Sujin looked at the crippled Imperial fleet. The urge to destroy them, to wipe them from space for the Alkuri, was a fire in her chest. But the plan was specific. The plan was about sending a message. "Open a channel to the Imperial cruiser," she said. "Broadcast this on the forced galactic frequency, but scramble the visual. Audio only." The communications officer worked. "Channel open, Commander." Sujin leaned slightly toward the microphone. Her voice was not filled with rage. It was cold, clear, and precise. It was the voice of calibration. "Imperial Commander, you came for a harvest. You found a reckoning. Look at your fleet. Remember this moment. Tell your empire that Earth is not for sale. Tell them we have seen their cruelty, and we are not impressed." She paused, letting the silence stretch across the light years to every listening Imperial post. Then she delivered the final line, crafted by the strategic minds on Earth, a line meant to burrow into the Imperial pride like a worm. "Your harvest is canceled. The next shipment you receive from this system will be your own wreckage." The channel closed. Then, on a secure, tight beam frequency directed solely at the Imperial cruiser's main computer, a small data packet was transmitted. It contained no words. It was just two files. One was a sensor recording from the Dauntless, showing the Imperial cruiser's engines being destroyed. The other was a short, repeating text line. Translated into the Imperial language, it read, "Harvest this. The human fleet did not fire another shot. They simply turned, their engines flaring to life, and moved back towards the inner solar system, leaving the broken Imperial force drifting in the silent dark." The lesson was over. The reply had been sent. And somewhere, in the heart of the Galactic Empire, the first cold trickle of doubt began to seep into the bedrock of their arrogance. The silence that followed the return of Earth's fleet was heavier than before. This time, it was a waiting silence. The message had been sent. The Empire would have heard it. Everyone on Earth knew the hammer would fall next. But there was no panic. The quiet focus only deepened. The victory against the Harvest fleet was not celebrated as a win, but studied as a first test. Jin Woo and his team pored over every millisecond of data. The shield had held, but it had weaknesses under sustained fire. The gravity mines were effective, but their area of influence was smaller than hoped. The Empire would adapt. They would come back with more. So humanity had to adapt faster. Jinwoo's new simulators were filled with projected Imperial responses. "They will not send a mid-tier cruiser next," he told the grim-faced Unified Defense Command. "They will send a legion, a dedicated war fleet. Their doctrine is shock and awe. They will try to overwhelm a single point, likely our orbital defenses or a major population center, to break our spirit before the real fight." He pointed to the holographic solar system. "So we don't give them a single point. We turn the entire system into the battlefield. We make every rock, every field of space dangerous." On the other side of the planet, Minho Lee was already working on the next iteration. The success of the gravity mines was just the beginning. His teams were now installing larger, more powerful generators on modified asteroid bases. They were not weapons. They were environment changers. "We cannot match their fleet's size," Mignot explained, his eyes ringed with fatigue but burning with focus. "So we change the rules of the space they fly in. We make gravity itself our ally." In the shipyards, Soo-Jin Kim oversaw the installation of improved shield emitters. The new design could cycle power faster, redistributing it to points of impact. She drilled her expanded fleet in complex, dancing maneuvers, their movements dictated by the predictive models Jinwoo's team sent up daily. The human fleet learned to move like a school of fish, individually small, but collectively untouchable. The Empire's response came sooner than expected. The 7th Legion, a premier assault force known for reducing rebellious worlds to glass, dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. It was a terrifying sight. 3 massive dreadnoughts, surrounded by 20 cruisers and a cloud of destroyers and fighters. They moved with a chilling, beautiful synchronization. Their commander, a veteran of a dozen pacifications named Prax, surveyed the system. His orders were simple: sterilize Earth. There would be no more warnings, no more harvests. Just an end. Prax expected to see the human fleet gathered around their planet in a pathetic last stand. He did not. His long-range sensors detected small, scattered contacts everywhere. A few ships near Mars, some activity in the asteroid belt. It looked like disorganization, panic. He smiled. Move to engagement vector Alpha. Target the largest population center on the planet. We will show them the cost of their defiance in the first minute. As the Legion surged forward, Jinwoo watched from Earth. The Imperial formation was perfect. Textbook. It was exactly the hammer blow he had predicted. "Initiate scatter field," he said. At that command, Minho's hidden generators hummed to life. Not on ships, but on dozens of barren asteroids and derelict monitoring stations scattered along the Legion's path. Space seemed to ripple. There was no flashy explosion. Instead, the smooth formation of the 7th Legion broke apart. Ships lurched violently as gravity fields spiked and dropped in unpredictable waves. A cruiser veered into the path of a dreadnought, forcing both to scramble to avoid a collision. The perfect synchronization was gone, replaced by confusion. "What is this?" Prax demanded on his bridge, gripping his chair as his own dreadnought shuddered. "Local gravity anomalies, sir. Extreme and artificial. Our navigation is compromised." Before Prax could issue a new order, the human fleet struck. They did not come from one direction. They came from everywhere. Small groups of ships, using the gravity distortions as cover, shot out from behind asteroids, from the shadow of Mars's moon. They fired their railguns and launched missiles, not at the heavily armored dreadnoughts, but at the engines and sensor arrays of the cruisers and destroyers. They hit fast and vanished back into the chaotic gravity soup. Sergeant Hyen Kim's war began not in space, but on the ground. As Prax, frustrated, ordered a full orbital bombardment on the city of Shanghai as a demonstration, the plasma lances fired. But they never struck the city. From towers and hidden installations around the city's perimeter, localized photonic shields flared to life, interlocking like scales. The plasma splashed against the shimmering dome, lighting up the sky but not touching a single building below. From the streets, Hyen and soldiers like him watched, then moved. The Empire had expected a massacre from orbit. They had instead announced their ground landing zones. When Imperial troop carriers descended through the atmosphere, aiming for open fields, they were met not by armies, but by silence. And then from sewers, from rooftops, from hidden tunnels, Hyen soldiers fired. Their railgun slugs cracked through Imperial troop armor. They would fire a burst and melt away before the slow, heavy Imperial soldiers could react. The city became a maze of death in space. The battle was a nightmare for Prax. His mighty legion was being bled dry by 1,000 small cuts. His communications were jammed or delayed by the quantum sync chatter of the humans. Every time he focused on one group of human ships, 3 more would strike from behind. A dreadnought's main gun finally managed to track and destroy a human corvette. As the ship broke apart, Prax felt a moment of triumph. But the triumph died when he saw the data. The corvette had no crew. It was a drone, remote-piloted. He was wasting his most powerful weapons on empty metal. Sujin, aboard the Dauntless, led the main striking force. They used the gravity distortions as slingshots, building speed before shooting out to deliver a coordinated volley of fire on a single target, then diving back into the chaotic zone. She was no longer just a commander. She was a conductor, and the symphony was one of controlled, furious chaos. The battle lasted for hours. The Imperial Legion was not destroyed in a grand explosion. It was dismantled. Ship by ship, system by system, its power was stripped away. Prax's flagship, scarred and limping, was finally isolated. 3 of his cruisers were drifting, dead. The others were scattered. His troop carriers on the planet were being systematically hunted. On Earth, Una Choi watched the report stream in. She stood before a global audience, her face illuminated by the light of tactical maps. "They told us we would be calibrated," she said, her voice strong. "They told us we were weak. Look at the sky tonight. Their fire is lighting up our shields, not our homes. Their soldiers are falling to our streets. They are not calibrating us. We are teaching them. We are teaching them the price of their arrogance." Aboard his dying ship, Prax received a broadcast. It was not on a secure channel. It was wide open, meant for the whole galaxy to hear. It showed the view from the ground in Shanghai, where Imperial troops were surrendering, their armor cracked open. It showed the ruined hulls of his cruisers drifting in space. The final image was the face of Commander Sujin Kim, her expression calm, but her eyes like flint. She said only 7 words. "The 7th Legion is no more." Then the broadcast ended. Prax had failed. The Legion was broken. The human fleet, seeing his crippled dreadnought, did not move in for the kill. They simply held their positions, watching. The message was clear. They were letting him go, letting him carry the news back to the Empire. The humiliation was a weapon sharper than any RAILGUN dot in the Imperial Palace. Light years away, Emperor Creel watched the same broadcast. The stone in his gut was no longer doubt. It was cold, blossoming rage. The silent blue world had not just resisted. It had humiliated his finest. It had fought a war he did not understand. The time for legions was over. He would go himself. He would bring the core fleet. He would erase this irritating, clever planet from the cosmic record. He would pour the full, unmeasured fury of the Galactic Empire into their sun. The final calibration was coming. The final Imperial fleet was not just a military force. It was a declaration. It was a funeral procession for a world. Emperor Creel himself stood on the bridge of the Silent Judge, a planet-killer-class dreadnought larger than a mountain. Around it moved the core of Imperial power. Dozens of dreadnoughts, hundreds of cruisers, a swarm of support ships, so vast it blotted out the stars. They moved into the Sol system not with tactical formations, but with the slow, inevitable weight of a glacier. There was no cleverness to their approach, only overwhelming, undeniable mass. Creel's message to Earth was simple and broadcast on all frequencies. You have earned oblivion. On Earth, the mood was different. There was no fear left. It had been burned away in the fires of the previous battles. What remained was a grim, determined clarity. They had known this moment would come. The plan for the legions was one thing. The plan for the Emperor's personal armada was something else entirely. It was called rage. In the bunker, Jingwu Park's screens were no longer showing simulations. They showed the live, terrifying sensor feed of the Imperial Armada. It was bigger than any of his models had predicted. His fingers flew across his console, not with panic, but with a final, calm checklist. The system was ready. It was Minho's masterpiece, built on the bones of Jingwu's understanding of Imperial thinking. Creel would come straight for Earth. He would want to see it burn with his own eyes. He would gather his fleet for the final glorious barrage. His arrogance was the key. "The fleet is moving into the projected kill zone," Jinwu said, his voice flat. "Between Mars and Jupiter. They are holding formation. They are not even scanning the asteroids. They think we have nothing left." In his lab, Minho Lee watched the same data. His life's work, the gravity manipulation technology, had been scaled up beyond anything he had dreamed. It was not a weapon. It was a series of massive, hidden generators built into captured Imperial wreckage and disguised asteroids, now floating in a loose sphere around the area where the Empire gathered. They called it the Anvil. Its purpose was not to attack, but to change a single fundamental rule for a few. Precious minutes. Commander Sujin Kim's fleet was not hiding. It was positioned behind the moon, a last visible shield. Her orders were not to attack the Imperial fleet. Her orders were to survive its opening salvo, and to look like she was trying to defend Earth. She had to sell the lie. On her bridge, she addressed her crew. "Today, we are the bait," she said, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the console. "We must be convincing. We must make him believe we are the last line of defense. For the Alkari, for everyone they have ever hurt. Hold the line." On the ground, Sergeant Hyen Kim and his soldiers were in deep bunkers. Their fight was over. This battle would be won or lost in the void. All they could do was watch and wait. Hyen sat with his men, looking at a screen showing the approaching armada. "Just look at them all," one young soldier whispered. Hyen just grunted. Big target. Emperor Creel watched the pitifully small human fleet arrange itself between his armada and the blue planet. He felt a cold satisfaction. This was how it should end. Not with tricky gravity mines and hit-and-run attacks, but with a sheer, majestic display of power that would be seen across the galaxy. "Order the fleet to form firing solution Alpha," he commanded. "All primary weapons to focus on the human fleet, then the planetary shields. We will break their toys, then break their world." The Imperial Armada came to a relative halt, spreading into a vast, curved firing line. Energy readings spiked as 1,000 planet-killing weapons charged. It was a sight meant to instill ultimate despair. "Now," Jinwu whispered at that command. Minho activated the anvil. There was no flash of light, no explosion. But across the Imperial fleet, every single instrument went insane. Gravity, the most constant force in the universe, suddenly changed. On the Silent Judge, Creel was thrown to the deck as the artificial gravity quadrupled for a second, then vanished entirely, sending him floating. Alarms screamed. Ships that were not designed for variable gravity stresses groaned. Hull plates buckled. "What is this?" Creel bellowed, pulling himself back to his chair. "Is it more of their minds?" Then the second phase activated. The anvil didn't just create random gravity wells. It created a focused, crushing field that covered the entire volume of space where the Imperial fleet had so proudly gathered. It was like the entire region of space suddenly had the gravity of a neutron star. The effect was not violent in the explosive sense. It was far worse. Imperial ships, built with massive reactors, heavy armor, and dense materials, were suddenly crushed by their own weight. The elegant dreadnoughts folded in on themselves like crumpled paper. Reactor cores, compressed beyond their limits, imploded silently, swallowing whole ships in flashes of unnatural darkness. Cruisers snapped their spines. The smaller ships simply pancaked into nothingness. The mighty firing line collapsed inward, a symphony of silent, structural ruin. On the bridge of the Dauntless, Sujin and her crew watched in stunned silence. The screens showed the Imperial Armada vanishing from the sensor grid, not in bursts of plasma, but in rapid, chilling flickers as mass signatures winked out. The Emperor's Grand Fleet was being erased not by weapons, but by the fundamental laws of the universe, turned against them. The Silent Judge, being the largest and strongest, lasted the longest. Creel stared, uncomprehending, as his mighty vessels died around him. He saw a dreadnought simply flatten into a dense sphere of scrap. His own ship screamed in protest, the sound of metal tearing itself apart echoing through the halls. Viewports shattered inward. Then, with a final deafening groan of dying metal, the Emperor's flagship was crushed. The last thing Creel saw was not fire, but the cold, uncaring stars before the darkness took him. The anvil powered down. The gravity returned to normal. Where the greatest army the galaxy had ever seen had floated, there was now only an expanding field of fine, metallic debris and a few, bizarrely compacted spheres of what used to be starships. It was over in less than 2 minutes. The silence on Earth was absolute. Then a sound began. It was not a cheer. It was a collective, world-sized exhale, a release of a breath held for months. In the streets, people hugged, but they cried more than they shouted. The relief was too profound, the cost too remembered. A small shuttle, flanked by 2 corvettes, moved from behind the moon and into the graveyard. Aboard were Sujin, Jinwu, and Haiyan. They found the remains of the Silent Judge, a broken eggshell of a ship. They boarded it. The interior was a tomb, a nightmare of compressed corridors and silent death. In the ruined command center, they found him. Emperor Creel was alive, pinned under a collapsed beam, his regal armor cracked. He was breathing in shallow, pained gasps. He looked up, his ancient eyes clouded with pain and utter confusion. He saw the humans in their practical, unadorned suits. He saw their faces, not twisted in savage triumph, but set in cold, solemn lines. He could not understand it. His voice was a broken rasp. What? What are you? Commander Sujin Kim knelt beside him, not with mercy, but with finality. She looked at the architect of 10 billion deaths, now broken by forces he could not even perceive. You showed us your fury, she said, her voice quiet in the tomb-like silence of the ship. We simply returned it, measured, focused, and multiplied. She stood up, looking down at him. We are the calibrated. They left him there. They did not take him prisoner. They did not execute him. They let him die in the ruins of his own hubris, a final, fitting end. The broadcast sent to the galaxy was simple. It showed the empty space where the Imperial fleet had been. It showed the broken hull of the Silent Judge. There was no narration, no victory speech, no threat. The image held for a full minute. Then it faded to black dot. The message was clearer than any words. The rage had been unleashed. The lesson was over. The galaxy now knew that from a small blue world, fury waited. And it was patient. And it was infinitely clever. And it would not be slaughtered again.